The wind in Montana doesn't just howl, it screams. And on that day in 1875, it was screaming for Lillian Evans. Her wedding dress, a thing of lace and hope just hours before, was turning into her ice-caked shroud. Every breath was a shard of glass in her lungs. The world was a blur of white. A bride's wedding day is supposed to be the happiest of her life. Hers was turning out to be her last. She huddled against a boulder, the chattering of her teeth the only sound besides the wind. She was supposed to be marrying Richard Thornton, the son of the richest man in Helena. He'd promised her security, a life free from the hardships that had taken her father just 2 months prior. But promises, she now knew, were just words. And some words were poison. "You ain't worth the trouble, girl," he'd snarled, his handsome face twisted into something ugly. He'd shoved her from the wagon, right into the teeth of the coming blizzard. Her crime. She'd refused to sign a piece of paper, a deed. The deed to her father's land. His last words to her echoed in the storm. "Find your own way back to town if you're so clever." That memory burned hotter than the frostbite creeping into her fingers and toes. She'd stumbled through the snow for hours, the white dress dragging her down until her legs gave out. Now, darkness was falling, and with it, a cold so deep it felt like the end of everything. Tears froze on her cheeks. She whispered a prayer for her father, for a quick end. And that's when she saw it. A shape, dark and menacing, moving through the swirling snow. At first she thought it was death itself, come to claim her on a pale horse. The figure grew closer, resolving into a man on a powerful chestnut stallion. He loomed over her, a specter in the storm. "Good Lord," a deep voice cut through the wind. "What are you doing out here?" Lillian tried to speak, but her lips were frozen solid. She could only stare. The stranger was off his horse in a single fluid motion. He knelt in the snow, his eyes wide with shock as he took in her wedding dress, now tattered and gray. "You're freezing to death," he said, his voice calm but urgent. He didn't wait for a reply. He shrugged off his own heavy fur coat, a thing that probably cost more than her whole ranch, and wrapped it around her. The sudden, shocking warmth was so intense it made her want to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. "I'm taking you to my cabin," he said, and then he lifted her as if she weighed nothing at all. Her head fell against his shoulder. "Stay with me, miss. Don't you dare give up." Through a haze of pain and cold, she saw a strong jaw, dark stubble, and eyes the color of a thundercloud. He swung her onto his horse, then mounted behind her, his arms a solid wall against the wind. His voice was a low rumble in her ear. "Just stay with me." And then, against all odds, as the world went black, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long, long time. Safety. Warmth. It was the first thing she knew. A deep, bone-soaking warmth that pushed the deadly cold into a distant memory. She was buried in furs, a fire crackling nearby, painting the rough-hewn walls of a cabin in dancing orange light. "Welcome back," the deep voice said. She turned her head. Her rescuer sat in a chair by the bed, watching her. He was younger than she'd thought, maybe 30, rugged, handsome, with dark hair that curled over his collar. He looked like he'd been carved from the Montana wilderness itself. "Where?" Her voice was a dry rasp. He was there instantly with a cup of water, holding her head as she drank. "My cabin, about 15 miles from Helena. Name's Calb Mitchell." His eyes drifted to the ruined dress hanging by the fire. "Found you half frozen in a wedding dress. I reckon that's a story worth hearing, when you're up to telling it." The memories came rushing back, a bitter flood. "Lillian Evans," she managed. "I was supposed to be married." "Gathered that much," Calb replied, a hint of dry humor in his voice. "Though most brides don't end their wedding day in a snowdrift." The betrayal felt as sharp as the cold had. He left me, she whispered, because I wouldn't sign away my father's land. Something in Kalb's eyes went hard as flint. What kind of man leaves a woman to die on the prairie? The kind who values property more than people, Lillian answered, her voice gaining a little strength. Richard Thornton, the banker's son. Kalb's face darkened even more. Thornton, I know of him. Got a reputation for being shrewd. Shrewd is one word for it, she said. Well, Miss Evans, you're safe now. Storm's not letting up, but you can stay as long as you need. When it breaks, I'll take you wherever you need to go. She nodded, but a cold knot of fear tightened in her stomach. Where could she go? Her father's ranch was all she had, and now she wasn't even sure she still owned it. Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. I owe you my life. Kalb, he corrected gently. And you don't owe me a thing. Any decent man would have done the same. But as Lillian drifted back to sleep, wrapped in the warmth of the fire and the unexpected safety of this stranger's cabin, she knew that wasn't true. Most men weren't decent. She'd almost married one who wasn't. And she had a terrible feeling that Kalb Mitchell was far more than just a decent man. For 3 days the blizzard howled, sealing them inside the small cabin. It was a comfortable prison, filled with the smell of wood smoke and brewing coffee. As Lillian's strength returned, she learned more about her rescuer. Kalb Mitchell wasn't just a rancher. He bred and trained the finest horses in the territory, a business he'd built from nothing. My father was cavalry, he told her over a stew that was simple but delicious. Taught me everything about horses before he passed. I started with 2 mares and a stallion. Now I've got 15 of the best animals this side of the Mississippi. My father was a rancher too, she found herself saying, the words coming easier now. Cattle were his life. He brought us out here after my mother died. It was just the 2 of us, until the fever took him last fall. Kalb's gaze was soft, with a knowing sadness. Sorry for your loss. It's not easy, losing family out here. No, it isn't, she agreed. After her father died, the loneliness had been a heavy shroud. That's when Richard Thornton had come calling. He was handsome, charming, and he spoke of security and comfort. To a woman alone, those words were a siren song. And then he showed his true colors. Kalb finished for her, his jaw tight. Lillian stared into the fire. He handed me the land deed right before the ceremony. Said it was just a formality, for a bride to sign her property over to her husband. When I told him I wanted the lawyer to look it over, he changed. She could still see the fury in Richard's eyes. He'd called her ungrateful, suspicious. He'd said no man wanted a wife who didn't trust him. Then he'd left her in the snow. Kalb's hand clenched into a fist. That man is owed a reckoning. His quiet anger on her behalf was a strange comfort. A small smile touched her lips. I appreciate the thought, but a reckoning won't solve my problems. I have no family, almost no money, and a ranch I might not even own anymore. She sighed, and a ruined reputation. Reputations, Kalb scoffed, as if the word tasted bad. Out here, what matters is what you can do, not what folks say. He looked at her, his eyes sharp and assessing. Can you run that ranch? A spark of her father's pride flared inside her. I've been running it since he got sick. I can rope, ride, and mend a fence as well as any man, Mr. Mitchell. I may have agreed to marry for security, but I'm no helpless flower. A slow smile spread across Kalb's face, transforming his rugged features. I believe you, Miss Evans, and it's still Kalb. Their eyes met, and a silent understanding passed between them. They were 2 of a kind, carved from the same hard, unforgiving land. They knew what it took to survive. But survival was about to get a whole lot harder. The storm broke on the 4th day. The world outside was a pristine, silent wilderness of white. Kalb gave her a pair of trousers and a warm coat, then took her to the barn. The air was sweet with the smell of hay and horse. "This is Thunderbolt," he said, introducing the magnificent stallion that had carried them through the blizzard. Lillian stroked the horse's nose, murmuring her thanks. The great animal nuzzled her hand. "He likes you," Kalb observed, surprised. "Doesn't usually take to strangers." "Animals sense things," she said. "They know who to trust." "Wise creatures," Kalb agreed, but he wasn't looking at the horse. He was looking at her, with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Later, they walked the edge of his property. For the first time in months, Lillian found herself laughing as he told her stories of his life in Montana. The sound was rusty, unfamiliar. "You have a beautiful laugh," Kalb said, his voice suddenly serious. "It suits you better than sorrow." Her breath hitched. "Thank you, Kalb, for everything. For treating me like a person, not a possession." "Is that how he made you feel?" Kalb asked, his voice low. She nodded. "I see it now. He wanted my father's land. I was just the key to get it." "You deserve better," Kalb said simply. Just as he spoke, a sound cut through the silence. Hoofbeats, distant but getting closer. Kalb tensed instantly. His hand dropped to the revolver at his hip. "Stay behind me," he ordered, his gentle manner vanishing, replaced by a man who was all sharp edges and coiled steel. 3 riders appeared over the snowy ridge, heading straight for the cabin. "Recognize them?" Kalb asked, his voice a low growl. Lillian squinted. Her blood ran cold. The man in the middle, sitting his horse like a king, was Richard. Kalb's expression was grim. "Looks like your fiancé has come calling. The question is, what do you want to do?" Her mind raced. Go with Richard, back to humiliation and uncertainty. Or stand her ground, here, with this man who had shown her more kindness in 4 days than Richard had in 4 months. The answer was surprisingly easy. "I'm not going with him." Kalb gave a single sharp nod. His eyes never left the approaching riders. "Then you won't." Richard Thornton reined in his horse, his face a mask of false concern. "Lillian, thank God you're alive. We've been searching everywhere." "Have you now?" Kalb's voice was dangerously mild. "Funny, considering you're the one who left her on the prairie to die." Richard's mask slipped for a second. "I don't know what lies this cowboy has been telling you, Lillian, but you must come home. Everyone is worried." "I'm not going anywhere with you, Richard," she said, her voice shaking only a little. "You abandoned me." "You were hysterical, darling," he said, taking a step forward. "Wedding nerves. You jumped from the wagon before I could stop you." "That's close enough," Kalb warned. His hand was still on his gun. Richard's smile vanished. "This is none of your business, horse breeder. Lillian is my fiancée." "Ex-fiancée," Lillian snapped. His eyes went cold. "Don't be a fool. What will you do? Stay here with this nobody? I'd rather stand on my own 2 feet than kneel before a man like you." The rage that flashed in his eyes was terrifying. He took a step back, his hand inching towards his own hip. But Kalb was faster. The click of the hammer on Kalb's revolver was the loudest sound in the world. Richard froze. "The lady asked you to leave," Kalb said, his voice deadly quiet. "I suggest you do it." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Richard slowly backed away, his face a storm of fury and humiliation. "This isn't over," he hissed, swinging onto his horse. "That land will be mine, and you'll regret choosing him." They watched until the riders were just specks on the horizon. Only then did Lillian realize she'd been holding her breath. "Are you all right?" Kalb asked, turning to her. "Yes," she said, and it was the truth. But what happens now? He won't give up. Now, Calb said, a thoughtful look on his face. We find out what he's planning, and then we fight him. We? She asked, her heart giving a strange little leap. Calb's storm-gray eyes met hers. Yes, we. Unless you'd rather do this alone. She shook her head. No, we sounds just fine. As they walked back to the cabin, a new feeling began to bloom in Lillian's chest. It wasn't the desperate need for security that had led her to Richard. It was something else entirely. Something wilder, stronger, and infinitely more dangerous. It was hope. The next morning, they rode for Helena. The journey was long, but Lillian barely noticed. She told Calb about her father, about the ranch he'd poured his life into. He always said a person could build something lasting in Montana, she explained. He taught me everything. How to mend fences, how to birth a calf, how to read a brand. Sounds like a wise man, Calb remarked. He was, she said. He wanted me to be able to stand on my own. It turned out her father was wiser than she ever knew. As they neared town, a knot of anxiety tightened in her gut. Richard's father owns half of Helena, she warned. People will stare. Let them, Calb said. We have nothing to hide. Their first stop was the office of Edwin Hargrove, her father's lawyer. The old man's eyes widened when he saw Lillian in trousers, with a grim-faced stranger at her side. Miss Evans, we feared the worst, he exclaimed. There have been developments. What kind of developments? Calb asked. Mr. Hargrove polished his spectacles. That is not the story the Thorntons are telling. According to them, you had a bout of hysteria and fled. They've painted a very convincing picture of a grief-stricken young woman who has lost her senses. That's a lie, Lillian said, her voice shaking with anger. I suspect so, the lawyer said gravely. But it gets worse. They filed papers yesterday. They claim you verbally promised to sign the ranch over to Richard as a wedding gift. They're trying to enforce that agreement. Can they do that? Calb demanded. Not legally, Hargrove sighed. But with their influence, they can make things very difficult. They're trying to paint you as unstable, Lillian, unfit to manage your own affairs. The trap was closing in. Richard wasn't just trying to take her land. He was trying to erase her, to turn her into a madwoman in the eyes of the world. They're trying to force you to sell, Calb said, his voice hard. Cut off your credit, turn the town against you, leave you with no other choice. Precisely, the lawyer agreed. I will fight this. Your father was my friend. But be careful, the Thorntons play for keeps. Walking through town was an ordeal. People who had known her for years now looked away. Whispers followed them like shadows. Don't let them break you, Calb murmured, his presence a solid comfort beside her. Her ranch was 3 miles outside of town. As they rode up the path, a terrible silence greeted them. The corral was empty. The cattle, she whispered, her heart sinking. They're gone. Calb's face was a grim mask. He dismounted, his hand on his gun. Let's check the house. The front door hung open on one hinge. Inside, it was chaos. Furniture was overturned, drawers ripped out. Her father's books were torn and scattered. A shattered frame on the floor held the ghost of her parents' wedding portrait. This wasn't a robbery. It was a violation. A message. They're trying to break your spirit, Calb said, his voice tight with rage. Lillian knelt, picking up a piece of the broken glass. Anger, cold and pure, burned away her shock. Well, they've failed. Suddenly a noise came from the barn, a horse whickering. Calb drew his revolver in a single practiced motion. Stay here. No, she said, getting to her feet. This is my home. I'm not hiding. They moved towards the barn together. Inside, they found a stooped figure brushing down an old horse. Jackson, Lillian cried, relief washing over her. The old ranch hand spun around, his weathered face breaking into a grin. "Miss Lillian, thank the Lord." He told them everything. Thornton's men had come 2 days ago. They'd claimed they had a legal order for the livestock. They took all 30 head. Jackson, an old man with a rusty shotgun, couldn't stop them. Then they came for the house, he said, his voice full of shame. Said they were looking for the deed. Tore the place apart. "Why this land?" Calb asked, looking around the modest property. "It's good grazing, but why go to all this trouble?" Jackson and Lillian shared a look. "Show him," the old man said. Lillian led Calb to a small shed behind the house. Inside, under a false floor, was a tunnel. "My father found this 3 years ago," she explained, lighting a lantern. "He told no one but me and Jackson." The tunnel opened into a small cavern. In the lantern light, the rock walls glittered. Calb stared, his breath catching in his throat. Veins of raw, gleaming silver snaked through the rock. "A silver deposit," he breathed. "Not a huge one," Lillian said, "but enough. Enough to make this ranch the most valuable piece of land in the county. My father was waiting for the right time." "And the Thorntons found out," Calb finished. The pieces were falling into place. Richard's courtship, the insistence on the deed, the brutal aftermath when she refused. It was never about marriage. It was about this, a secret fortune hidden beneath the earth. "This changes everything," Calb said, his voice grim as they climbed back to the surface. "They won't just give up, not with this at stake." "Neither will I," Lillian vowed, her resolve hardening into something unbreakable. This was no longer just about a piece of land. It was about her father's legacy. It was about justice, and she was going to get it, or die trying. They made a plan. Jackson would stay at the ranch, a silent guardian. Lillian would return with Calb to his property, a safe haven where they could strategize. As they rode away from her violated home, Lillian felt a storm of emotions: grief, rage, and a terrifying, thrilling flicker of determination. They made camp under the vast, star-dusted Montana sky. The fire crackled, a small bubble of warmth in the immense darkness. "Why are you doing this, Calb?" she asked, watching his strong profile in the firelight. "You barely know me. This fight, it could get you killed." He looked at her, his gaze steady and intense across the flames. "Maybe I believe some things are worth fighting for. Justice, honor." He paused. "A woman brave enough to stand her ground when the world tries to bury her." Her heart did a slow, painful flip in her chest. "I'm not brave. I was about to marry a man I didn't love, just to feel safe." "But you didn't," he countered. "When it mattered, you chose yourself. That's the only courage that counts, Lillian." No one had ever looked at her like that, as if she were something more than a rancher's daughter or a prospective bride, as if he saw the steel her father had forged in her. In that moment, she realized he had saved more than her life in that blizzard. He had saved her soul. The next few weeks were a blur of quiet preparation. A war council held in a remote cabin. Mr. Hargrove filed legal challenges in Helena, creating a blizzard of paperwork. Calb rode out to the neighboring ranches, not asking for help, but telling the story, the true story. To Lillian's surprise, support trickled in. An old rancher who'd been cheated by Thornton's bank, a family whose water rights had been stolen. The Thorntons had left a trail of resentment across the territory, and people were starting to see Lillian's fight as their own. At Calb's ranch, a new routine formed. They worked from sunup to sundown, tending to his horses. Lillian found a peace in the hard, physical labor. She had a gift with the animals, a quiet patience that Calb watched with growing admiration. "You're a natural," he said one afternoon, as she calmed a spooked colt with a soft murmur and a gentle hand. "My father used to say, 'Animals respond to what's in your heart,'" she replied. The days were filled with work, but the evenings were filled with something else. Shared glances that lasted a moment too long, hands that brushed as they passed in the small cabin. A tension that was both terrifying and wonderful. Then, one morning, Jackson rode in, his face etched with worry. "Thornton's men were back," he announced, breathing hard. "They've posted notices all over town, claiming the property is legally abandoned since you ain't returned. They've called a town council meeting. You have 1 week to show up and defend your claim, or you forfeit the land." It was a trap, a public spectacle. "They'll say I'm unstable," Lillian realized, the cold dread returning. "They'll put me on display and have their paid-off doctor declare me incompetent." "And there's more," Jackson said grimly. "Richard's been spreading a new story. He's telling everyone you didn't run away. He's saying Kalb here is holding you against your will, that you are his prisoner." The sheer, venomous cunning of it took her breath away. If she didn't appear, she lost the ranch. If she appeared with Kalb, it would prove Richard's story. They would take her away from him and lock her up. Kalb paced the small cabin like a caged wolf. "They want to control the narrative. They want to put you in their arena, in front of their council, in their town." His fist hit the rough-hewn table. "So we're not going to play their game." His eyes met hers, and in them she saw a fire that matched her own. "We're going to change the rules." The night before the council meeting, the air in the cabin was thick with unspoken fear. Lillian found Kalb on the porch, staring out at the immense dark landscape. "Second thoughts?" she asked softly. "Never," he said without looking at her. "I'm worried about what comes after. If we win this, you'll have your ranch back. You'll have your life back." The unspoken words hung between them, a life that might not include him. "We won't fail," she said, with more certainty than she felt. He finally turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "Lillian, I know the timing is all wrong, and the last thing you need is another man making demands on your life, but I have to say it." He took a breath. "I care for you, more than I have any right to." She stepped closer, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "The timing might be wrong," she whispered, "but the feeling isn't. I care for you too, Kalb." He reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek. His touch was electric. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "that won't change. Nor will mine." He kissed her then. It wasn't a kiss of passion, but of promise. It was gentle and searching, and spoke of everything they hadn't dared to say. When they finally broke apart, his smile was a beacon in the darkness. "Well," he breathed, "now we have even more reason to win." She nodded, her own resolve hardening like steel. "For our future." The words hung in the cold night air, a fragile, defiant prayer. Helena was buzzing like a disturbed beehive. The town council meeting was the biggest show in years, and everyone wanted a front-row seat. The meeting hall, built with Thornton money, was packed to the rafters. Lillian rode into town with her head held high, Kalb at her side. Behind them rode Jackson and a dozen weathered, grim-faced ranchers, the allies Kalb had gathered. They weren't an army, but they were a statement. Lillian Evans was not alone. Inside, Richard was already holding court, painting a picture of Lillian's supposed madness. Her irrational behavior, her tragic disappearance, he was saying, his voice dripping with false sympathy. Then he saw her, standing in the doorway. The crowd went silent. For a heartbeat, raw shock showed on his face. Then the smooth mask of concern slid back into place. "Lillian, we are all so relieved to see you safe." "I didn't run away, Richard," she said, her voice ringing with clarity in the silent hall. You left me to die." A collective gasp went through the crowd. "You're confused, darling," he said smoothly. "The trauma." "My memory is perfectly clear," she cut him off, walking down the aisle, Calb and Mr. Hargrove flanking her. "Just as clear as the deed to the land you tried to steal. Nathaniel Thornton, Richard's father, a man who looked like a hawk carved from ice, spoke for the first time. "And who is this?" he demanded, pointing a contemptuous finger at Calb. "The name is Calb Mitchell," Calb answered, his voice calm and steady. "I'm the man who found Miss Evans half dead in the snow after your son abandoned her." A murmur went through the crowd. The Mitchell name still meant something in this territory. It meant honor. "This is a fraud," Richard shouted, his composure starting to crack. "She's been coerced. This man is a fortune hunter who has poisoned her mind." "On the contrary," Mr. Hargrove announced, stepping forward. "We have witnesses." He produced a sworn statement from one of the wagon drivers who had been there that day, a man who had finally grown a conscience. He testified that he'd seen Richard push Lillian from the wagon. Then a young woman stood up from the crowd. Mary Parker, a seamstress who'd been helping with the wedding dress. "I heard him," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "I heard Mr. Thornton threaten her when she wouldn't sign the deed." The crowd erupted. Richard's face went white with fury. "Enough!" Nathaniel Thornton roared, slamming his fist on the table. "This is irrelevant. The fact is, the Evans property holds a significant debt to my bank, a loan taken out by Jonathan Evans shortly before his death." A new shockwave went through the room. Lillian stared, confused. Her father had never mentioned a loan. Nathaniel smiled, a cold, triumphant smile. "Without Miss Evans here to manage the property, the loan is in default. The bank is foreclosing. The land and everything on it reverts to us. It's all perfectly legal." It was a brilliant, vicious trap. They had been so focused on Richard's crime, they hadn't seen the financial dagger his father was holding. All their testimony, all their witnesses, none of it mattered against the cold, hard fact of a legal debt. They were ruined. Calb stepped forward. "What was this loan for?" "Improvements, equipment," Nathaniel waved a dismissive hand. "It hardly matters. A debt is a debt." "I think it does matter," came a new voice from the back of the hall. The crowd parted. An older, distinguished man walked forward. He commanded the room with his mere presence. "Judge Blackwell," the mayor stammered, his face paling. We weren't aware you were in town." "Clearly," the judge said, his eyes like chips of ice. "I find these proceedings fascinating, particularly this loan." He turned his piercing gaze on Nathaniel Thornton. "I've been investigating your bank's practices for 6 months, Nathaniel. A pattern of predatory loans to ranchers in distress. Loans with impossible terms, designed to fail, so you can seize their land." Nathaniel Thornton looked like he'd been slapped. "And I believe," the judge continued, his voice like the crack of a whip, "that the loan to Jonathan Evans was the most fraudulent of all, because my investigators can find no record of him ever receiving any money from you." The silence in the hall was absolute. "You fabricated the loan," Calb said, understanding dawning. "You forged his signature after he was dead." Judge Blackwell nodded grimly. "A crime that will see you hang, Nathaniel. You and your son, not just for fraud, but for the theft of Miss Evans's cattle and the attempted murder of Miss Evans herself." He looked at Lillian, his expression softening. "Your father was an honest man, Miss Evans. He would be very proud of you today." The Thorntons were arrested on the spot. Their empire of greed and deceit crumbled into dust in the space of 5 minutes. As they were led away in chains, Richard shot Lillian a look of pure, undiluted hatred. It didn't touch her. As the meeting hall emptied, Lillian stood in a daze, the roar of the crowd fading to a hum. She had won. She had faced down the most powerful men in the territory, and she had won. "What happens now?" she asked Kalb, her voice barely a whisper. He took her hand, his touch warm and real. "Now," he said, his smile gentle, "we go home. We get your cattle back. We rebuild." She asked, her heart aching with a hope so fierce it hurt. "If you'll have me," he said, his storm-gray eyes full of a future she hadn't dared to dream of. "I want to walk whatever path you choose, Lillian. With you." Tears she hadn't shed in the blizzard, in the ransacked house, or in the face of her enemies, finally fell. Tears of relief, tears of joy. "I choose the path with you, Kalb Mitchell," she said. His smile was the dawn after the longest night of her life. They rebuilt, not just the house, but the ranch and their lives. The silver mine provided the funds to make the Evans Ranch the most successful in the territory. They combined it with Kalb's horse breeding operation, creating the Mitchell-Evans Company, a name that became synonymous with quality and integrity. They married the following autumn, under a golden canopy of cottonwood leaves, surrounded by the friends who had stood by them. Judge Blackwell officiated. Jackson gave the bride away. Their love story, born in a blizzard and forged in a fight for justice, became a local legend. A reminder that even in the harshest wilderness, the most beautiful things can grow. 10 years passed. The ranch thrived. Their family grew. 2 sons and 2 daughters filled the house with laughter. One crisp winter morning, a letter arrived. It was from Mary Parker, the seamstress, who had moved to St. Louis. Tucked inside was a newspaper clipping. Richard Thornton, after years of failed schemes, had been arrested for fraud and was destitute. "Justice," Mary wrote, "comes to all eventually." Lillian folded the letter. She felt no triumph, only a distant pity for a man consumed by his own greed. "Bad news?" Kalb asked, coming up behind her on the porch, wrapping his arms around her waist. "No," she said, leaning back against his solid strength. "Just a reminder of how lucky I am that a certain cowboy happened to be riding through the worst blizzard in a decade." "Pure luck," he grinned into her hair. "I call it fate," she whispered, turning to kiss him. They stood there for a long moment, watching the snow begin to fall, blanketing the land they had fought for, the home they had built, the life they had created together. He had found her when she was lost, a bride abandoned to the storm. He had asked her to stay with him, just to survive the night. And she had stayed, through all the nights and all the years. And in staying, she had found not just survival, but everything. If you enjoyed this story of survival and justice, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss the next one.